Leaders from across the African continent are in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa for the annual African Union Summit. Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who is the head of the AU, has been pushing for the body to expand its powers. Later, he will pass the baton on to Egypt and to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who will lead the bloc for the next year. Involuntary migration is the main focus of this year's summit. Africa is home to a quarter of the world's refugees, and Ethiopia has become the continent's second largest host for displaced people. Now, some 400,000 of them are in the Gambela region. DW's Fanny Fachar visited a refugee camp there. A warning that some viewers might find this report disturbing.
We are traveling through a beautiful but dangerous region. Near the South Sudanese border in the impoverished lowland of Ethiopia lies Gambela, a hotbed of conflicts among different ethnic groups.
Behind me, that's South Sudan, a young and independent nation, but the fighting over there continues. More than 2 million people fled to neighboring countries like Ethiopia, but this country produces hundreds of thousands of displaced people of its own due to ethnic clashes, violence, droughts and flooding. So what's the perspective for refugees here?
Ethiopia has become Africa's second largest refugee hosting country. In the Gambela region, refugees number almost as many as Ethiopians, about 400,000. This camp is home to 60,000 traumatized refugees who fled fighting in South Sudan.
When
the war erupted in South Sudan, children were set on fire and many others were abducted. The soldiers even killed blind people. People were forced to eat dead bodies and have sexual intercourse with family members. Boys were forced to have sex with their mothers. This trauma will not be forgotten.
Rui and her family feel safe in this camp. It's supposed to be a temporary home, but they've been here for 4 years already. Without permission to work outside the camp, she fears the future looks dim.
When my husband was in South Sudan, he had a job, but now he doesn't. This is a problem because we depend on aid. Lack of education is also a problem. I want education for my children and for myself. Only then will we have a chance here in Ethiopia.
That's just one of the problems in the camp run by the UN and the Ethiopian government.
When we compare the number of the refugees with the service that we are providing to the refugee, it is very less than the standard that was set by United Nations High Commission for Refugees. More people and a less resource. And we are keeping almost providing the basic service, which is life-saving service. We are almost focusing on the life-saving food, health, water, and so on.
Outside the camp, there are mixed feelings among the local population. Ethiopia's ethnic Nuer are more welcoming of refugees because many arriving from South Sudan are from the same group. But Ethiopia's ethnic Anuak say they feel threatened.
Many of these refugees come from South Sudan. They're straining our resources. We are getting poorer, so the government should help us too. If not, there could be clashes with the refugees.
Here in Gambela city, the new Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has promised opportunities for everyone, refugees and locals. But unemployment is very high in the region, especially among young people.
We don't see any improvement regarding the youth. There are no jobs. We're trying to get ahead on our own, but we don't get very far.
Playing pool costs 5 birr or 20 US cents. It's the only form of entertainment they can afford. The lack of prospects drove Ethiopians to the streets to demand jobs last year. If employment prospects aren't forthcoming soon, existing tensions over land and ethnicity could boil over.
Well, as we heard, the African Union summit is getting underway in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, and forced migration is dominating the agenda there. Let's bring in correspondent Maria Gert Nicolescu. She's covering that meeting. Maria, good to see you. Sub-Saharan Africa hosts more than a quarter of the world's refugees. That's according to the UN. What's being discussed there to address their needs?
So first of all, it's important to understand that a very big number of refugees are actually displaced in their own country. Africa is host to 18 million internally displaced people who are considered to be the most vulnerable population of them all. So for the solution, the African Union Commission chairman actually just earlier stressed the importance of addressing the root causes of the displacements, the majority being linked to conflicts, as well as increasing cooperation at the continental level, which this summit is supposed to address through the creation, for instance, of an African humanitarian agency. But the countries also have to make sure that they pass internal laws to protect the refugees and integrate them into their society. So there have been some models in Africa. For example, Ethiopia, who is home to almost 1 million refugees, has passed a law last month giving refugees the right to work in the country.
All right, so looking at the roots of migration is the focus there. What about the challenges facing some of those host countries? You mentioned Ethiopia, but also Uganda and Sudan.
So Uganda is the country who hosts the most refugees in Africa, while Ethiopia is the country with the most internally displaced people in the world. So the challenges will be to implement the refugees' laws to protect them, which UN Secretary General has praised as very progressive for now, while at the same time addressing the concerns of the local populations. And the issue as well, as it often is the financing of the integration programs and job creation. So the World Refugee Council has proposed several solutions, for example, to change the system as a whole, including creating refugee bonds to share the burden, the financial burden between all countries.
All right, journalist Maria Gert Nicolescu covering the African Union summit in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, for us. Thank you so much, Maria.